Welcome everyone. We've mentioned in episode 9 that governments sometimes had a real interest in having inflation. We've seen that it had four main causes linked to economic life. Demand-induced, imported, induced by costs and market control. Then one having no link with economic life but merely caused by political actions, inflation induced by excess of money supply, i.e. money printing. We'll focus on the latter. The link to the video is here. Today, we'll see how, thanks to the magic of inflation, governments can reduce their foreign debts. If inflation has such a prevalent role for the governments, that's because it has a major effect on the control of the debt.
Wait. We've seen that inflation is basically when currency loses value, as the same quantity of money buys less and less things. So that's just a monetary phenomenon. If we're waiting that a monetary phenomenon pays our debts, then who's actually paying?
First, as you are aware, inflation due to an excessive expansion of the monetary supply is incorrectly but commonly defined as a general increase of the prices, although such increase is only a consequence of the excessive money supply. Let's look at this at the level of one single household. Let's consider you've got a monthly income of $1,000 and a monthly installment of $500 for your mortgage. The weight of your debts is at 50% of the income. Now let's assume that 10 years later, your monthly income has increased to $2,000 only thanks to the inflation. Your installments, yet, still cost you $500 a month. So, the weight of your debts becomes at only 25% of the income. This is how the states reduce the weight of their debts, simply under the weight of the inflation. Magic. With the governments, that's exactly the same. Each year, the GDP of the country increases necessarily at least by the percentage of the inflation. So if the debt is constant, with the inflation's work, the GDP will gradually increase and mechanically reduce the weight of the debt. The inflation will expand and trim the debt.
Nice, cool. So in the end, who pays?
The guy you owe money to, of course. Today, we generally borrow at very low interest rates. So, if the inflation goes up, the loss is for the one who lent you the money. When you lend money to a company or you buy sovereign bonds, to know how much you actually earn from it, you need to subtract the inflation rate to know what the real interest rate is. Inflation-adjusted return provides a more realistic performance of the investment, it lowers the positive returns and increases the losses.
So if I borrow money at 2% and that the inflation is at 3%, then I actually borrow at a negative interest rate of -1%, and it is actually my banker who pays so that I borrow money from him?
Yep. And here's the proper formula.
Nice. Excellent. So, where's the loophole? What's the trick? Why not trying to have interest rates of 5% then? Or even more? It would be even better, right?
Sure. But with 5% inflation, the lenders would promptly increase their interest rate. Nobody likes being ripped off. Also, it's easy to create inflation. It just requires that a government injects money into the economy. Yet, controlling it is not easy. The phenomenon has a heavy inertia. It's like trying to stop a train at full speed. Worse, the phenomenon is kind of self-sustaining. The more there is inflation, the more there will be inflation. It's also a bit like alcoholism. The good effects come first when you start drinking or when you start printing too much money. The bad effects only come later. That's why in both cases there's a strong temptation to overdo it. When it comes to the cure, it's the other way around. When you stop drinking or when you stop printing money in excess, the bad effects come first and the good effects only come later. That's why it's so hard to persist with the cure. Anyway, when we poke Mrs. Inflation a bit too much, it's the whole currency that loses its purchasing power.
So it's not reasonable to try to create inflation?
Certainly not. But some governments consider that if they create just a tiny amount of inflation, nobody will notice. And by the way, the incentive is huge. With a 2% inflation, a country would divide its debt by 2 after 35 years.
Nice.
Nice? Not sure. I'd rather say tempting. Don't forget that it's also the people's savings that is trimmed. Remember that inflation is in a way an invisible taxation that doesn't say its name.
Okay. Said this way, not so nice. But in fact, all I have to do is put my money on a good saving account. I'll get a good interest rate, from which a part will be used to cover the inflation and I'll collect the rest. And by the way, not investing your money is for losers, right?
Perhaps. Perhaps not. Investing means risks, maybe even putting your money in someone else's hands. So in the end, to cancel the effect of the inflation you're obliged to take risks, only to finance your government. Don't you think that someone simply willing to keep his money at his home and not willing to take risks, should be in position to do so? After all, everyone should be free to do what he wants with his money. That's the outcome of his own work. Well, in the current situation, with the high inflation, you're sentenced to see your financial assets being gradually sucked if you chose to leave them simply as they are.
Okay. But the inflation also triggers an increase of the wages. It's for protection from inflation that people at work ask for collective increase of the salaries.
Maybe. But once again, there's nothing guaranteed. And you'll simply find yourself obliged to negotiate an artificial salary increase with your boss, only to be able to pay an invisible taxation. And by the way, currently, the inflation is widely increasing much more than the wages.
Wait, this means that my purchasing power is actually decreasing?
Yep. And it will be the case each year. So, not that cool, right?
No, not cool.
And that will be it for today. If you liked the video, subscribe and share it to help developing this channel.